The galaxy had been unified for 3,000 years under the collective consciousness, a vast network of species bound together by telepathic harmony. Every intelligent race that emerged from their homeworld eventually joined, their minds linked in perfect understanding and cooperation. The process was simple and painless. A representative from the collective would arrive, extend their consciousness to the new species, and within moments, the entire civilization would feel the gentle embrace of countless minds welcoming them home. It had happened this way for 247 species across 18 galactic sectors. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the human exploration vessel Endeavour, watching the alien ship approach. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight, all flowing organic curves and bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with rhythmic light. 3 months ago, humanity had detected their first alien signal. 2 months ago, they had made first contact. Now the representatives of the collective consciousness were coming to formally welcome humanity into their fold. "They seem peaceful enough," said Dr. James Park, the mission's xenobiologist. He adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit he had never quite broken, despite years of laser surgery availability. "All their communications have been nothing but friendly." "Friendly and persistent," Sarah noted. The aliens had been very clear about their intentions. They wanted humanity to join the collective. They spoke of it as inevitable, as natural as breathing. Every species joined. Every species found peace and purpose within the greater whole. The alien vessel docked smoothly, and within the hour, 3 representatives stood in the Endeavour's main conference room. They were humanoid enough to be comprehensible, but alien enough to be unsettling. Their skin had an opalescent quality, shifting between colors, and their eyes were larger than human eyes, with no visible pupils. When they spoke, it was through a translation device. But there was something else, something that made the air feel thick and heavy. "We are the speakers," said the one in front, its voice melodious and deeply calming. "We come to bring you the gift that all peoples of the stars share, the gift of unity, the gift of true understanding." Sarah felt something brush against her mind. It was gentle, like a whisper, like someone calling her name from far away. She saw James stiffen beside her and knew he felt it too. Around the room, the other officers and scientists began to relax, their faces going soft with wonder. "It's beautiful," whispered Lieutenant David Torres, the tactical officer who had spent the entire week worrying about defense protocols. "I can feel them. I can feel everyone." But Sarah could not. She felt the touch, yes, felt something trying to enter her thoughts, but it could not take hold. It slid off her consciousness like water off glass. She looked at James and saw confusion in his eyes, then recognition. He felt it too. Whatever was happening to the others was not happening to them. "What is this?" Sarah asked, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. The speakers tilted their heads in unison, and for the first time their expressions showed something other than serene calm. They showed confusion. "You resist," said the speaker. "How do you resist? No species resists. It is not possible." Around the room, the other humans stood still, their eyes distant. They were smiling, but it was wrong. Sarah had known these people for years. She had served with Torres in the Mars colonies. She had celebrated James's wedding. These were not their smiles. "What have you done to them?" James demanded, stepping forward. "We have done what we do for all species," the speaker said, and now there was something in its voice that might have been concern. "We have welcomed them into the collective. We have freed them from the prison of singular consciousness. They are happy. They are home." "Release them," Sarah said, her hand now firmly on her weapon. "Now." "We cannot release what has been freely joined," another speaker said. "The connection, once made, is eternal. It is the natural state of all intelligent minds. You will understand when you join. Why do you resist? How do you resist?" Sarah triggered the emergency protocol. Alarms blared throughout the ship. Blast doors began to seal. The speakers looked around, more confused than alarmed. They did not seem to understand the concept of threat. "Your companions do not fear," the first speaker said. "They know the truth now. They know the peace of the collective. You will know it too. You must. All minds join. It is the way of the universe." But as the security teams arrived, Sarah saw that not all of them moved with that dreamy, distant expression. About 1 in 5 seemed alert, confused, and increasingly angry as they realized what had happened to their crewmates. Whatever the collective had done, it had not worked on everyone. It had not worked on her. It had not worked on James. It had not worked on roughly 20% of the crew. The speakers were taken into custody, though they did not resist. They simply stood in their holding cell, heads tilted, as if listening to something far away. The affected crew members were sedated and moved to the medical bay, where they lay in peaceful sleep, still smiling those wrong smiles. "Report," Sarah said once they were back in the command center with the unaffected officers. "Approximately 18% of the crew are unaffected by whatever the speakers did," reported Lieutenant Commander Patricia Okonkwo, who had been off shift during the encounter. "The affected individuals show unusual brain activity. There are new neural patterns forming, like they're connected to something we can't detect." "Can we reverse it?" James asked. "We don't even know what it is yet," Patricia said, "but we're working on it. The question is, why did it work on some of us and not others?" That was the question that haunted Sarah through the long night that followed. She stood in the observation deck again, looking out at the stars, wondering what humanity had stumbled into. They had dreamed of finding other life, of joining a galactic community. They had found it, and that community wanted to erase everything that made them individuals. Her communicator chirped. It was James, calling from the medical bay. "You need to see this," he said. Sarah found him in the lab, surrounded by brain scans and genetic sequences. He looked exhausted but excited in a way that bordered on manic. "I think I know why we're immune," he said without preamble. "Look at this. These are brain scans from the affected crew members and the unaffected ones. Notice anything?" Sarah studied the images. She was a pilot and commander, not a neuroscientist, but even she could see the differences. The unaffected individuals showed more activity in certain regions, more chaos in their neural patterns. The unaffected group shows higher baseline activity in the prefrontal cortex and unusual connectivity patterns in the default mode network, James explained. "At first I thought it might be genetic, but it's not that simple. It's neurological and psychological. I started looking at psychological profiles, and I found the pattern." He pulled up a list of names. Sarah recognized them all. The unaffected crew. "What do we have in common?" she asked. "Anxiety," James said. "Depression, ADHD, OCD, autism spectrum conditions. Every single person who resisted the collective has some form of neurodivergence. The more I dig, the clearer it becomes. Humans who experience the world differently, whose brains are wired differently, are immune to the mind control." Sarah felt her breath catch. She had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder in her 20s. She had learned to manage it, to function despite the constant low hum of worry in her mind. She had never imagined it might be what saved her. "The collective operates on a principle of synchronization," James continued. "They link minds together by establishing a shared rhythm, a common frequency. Most human brains, neurotypical brains, can be entrained to that frequency. But our brains don't work that way. We're already operating on different frequencies. My ADHD brain doesn't sync up easily with anything, not even other parts of my own brain sometimes. Your anxiety keeps you vigilant, questioning, resistant to outside influence. The autistic crew members process information too differently to be overridden. We're not immune because we're special. We're immune because we're already outliers." That's why the speakers were so confused, Sarah realized. They've never encountered a species where this doesn't work on everyone. Exactly. And Sarah, there's more. I accessed the collective's database through the translation interface before we locked them up. The collective has encountered over 200 species. Every single one was fully susceptible to their telepathic network. 100% of every population, until us. What makes humans different? Our diversity, James said simply. Most species seem to evolve toward cognitive uniformity. It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. A unified way of thinking makes communication easier, cooperation smoother. But humans, we kept our neurodivergent individuals. We didn't evolve them out. Maybe because we're a younger species, or maybe because our diversity actually provided survival advantages. Whatever the reason, we're the first species the collective has encountered that has a built-in resistance. Sarah turned back to the brain scans, her mind racing. If 20% of humanity is immune, that means 80% is vulnerable. If the collective reaches Earth, 80% of humanity would join the collective within days, maybe hours, James finished. And the rest of us would be the only ones left fighting for human independence. The only ones who even remember what human independence means. The implications were staggering. Sarah thought of Earth, of the 8 billion people living their lives, unaware that first contact meant not discovery, but absorption. She thought of her sister, neurotypical and successful, who had always been better at fitting in. She thought of her nephew, recently diagnosed with autism, who struggled in school but saw patterns no one else could see. We need to warn Earth, she said. We need to prepare for what's coming. Agreed, James said. But Sarah, there's something else. The speakers keep trying to communicate with me, not out loud, in my head. They're confused but also curious. They want to understand how we resist. They've never encountered resistance before, and it fascinates them. Can you communicate back? I don't know, maybe, but should I? It was a fair question. Opening a dialogue might give the collective more information about human vulnerability, but it might also give humanity more information about the collective. Try, Sarah decided, but carefully. We need to understand what we're dealing with. James nodded and closed his eyes. Sarah watched his face, seeing the concentration there, the effort. After a long moment, he opened his eyes again. They're willing to talk, he said, but they want me to come to them. They say some things can only be communicated mind to mind, and that they can't do that through the usual means with me. My mind is too different. It could be a trap. Everything with them is a trap in a way, James pointed out. Their entire existence is about absorbing other minds. But if we want answers, we need to take risks. Sarah considered. They were already in an impossible situation. Half the crew was under alien influence. Earth was potentially at risk, and they were alone in deep space with representatives of a civilization that considered forcible, telepathic bonding to be a friendly greeting. Do it, she said, but we do it on our terms, with every precaution we can think of. They set up the meeting in a specially prepared room, with medical monitors and a team standing by. James entered alone, facing the 3 speakers who stood calm and patient as they had been since their confinement. You wish to understand us, James said, and we wish to understand you. But I need you to understand something first. What you did to our crew, we call that an attack. We call that a violation. You took away their free will, their individual consciousness. That is not a gift to us. That is a horror. The speakers exchanged glances, their colors shifting to darker hues. You use words we do not understand, the first speaker said. Individual consciousness is not something to preserve. It is a limitation, a source of pain and confusion. We offer unity. We offer peace. Why would you cling to separation? Because that separation is what makes us human, James said. Our individual thoughts, our different perspectives, our ability to disagree and grow and change our minds. That's not a weakness, that's our strength. Then you are ill, the speaker said, and there was genuine sadness in its voice. All the galaxy knows that true intelligence is shared intelligence. True consciousness is collective consciousness. You suffer from isolation, and you do not even know you are suffering. We can feel it in you, the ones who resist most. Your minds are storms, chaos, disorder. Let us bring you peace. Our chaos is what saved us from you, James shot back. You call it disorder, we call it diversity, and it means you can't control us. Not all of us. For the first time, the speakers looked uncertain. They conferred among themselves silently, and James felt the pressure of their minds trying to touch his, trying to understand. This should not be possible, the speaker finally said. In 3,000 years, across 247 species, there has never been resistance. What are you? We're human, James said, and we're more complicated than you expected. The speaker approached closer, studying James with its large, unblinking eyes. Your mind is fragmented, pieces moving in different directions. It should not function. How does it function? It functions because human brains learn to work with our differences, not against them. Some of us think differently, process differently, feel differently, and that's okay. That's normal for us. It is not normal for anyone else, the speaker said softly. We have touched the minds of hundreds of billions of beings. All of them yearn for connection. All of them welcome the end of solitude. You are unique, human. You and your fragmented kind. We do not know what to do with you. And that, James realized, was both their greatest advantage and their greatest danger. The collective consciousness had never encountered a species it could not fully absorb. Humanity was an anomaly. The question was whether the collective would accept that anomaly or find a way to eliminate it. Back in the command center, Sarah was coordinating with Earth. The signal lag made real-time conversation impossible, but the warnings were being sent. Humanity needed to prepare. The next transmission from the collective changed everything. It came not through the speakers, but through a direct broadcast, powerful enough to reach the Endeavor without any relay. And its message was clear. Humanity would be welcomed into the collective. All of humanity. The resistant ones would be studied, understood, and eventually integrated. The collective had waited 3,000 years for perfection. It could wait a little longer to solve the problem of human neurodivergence. The war for human consciousness had begun, and 20% of humanity was the only army that could fight it. Sarah gathered the unaffected crew members in the conference room. Looking at them, she saw the future of human resistance. There was Lieutenant Okonkwo, whose OCD had made her a brilliant tactical analyst. There was Ensign Rachel Kim, whose autism made her an exceptional engineer. There was Dr. Ahmad Hassan, whose depression had never stopped him from being the most empathetic person on the ship. These were the people the world had often seen as different, as struggling, as needing to be fixed. Now they were the only ones who could save humanity from the gentle tyranny of forced unity. We're going to stop them, Sarah said. We're going to find a way to free our crew and protect Earth, because we understand something the collective doesn't. Being different isn't a weakness. It's not something to be cured or corrected or overridden. It's what makes us human, and it's what's going to keep us free. The crew nodded, determination on their faces. They had spent their lives learning to navigate a world that didn't always understand them. Now they would teach the galaxy that humanity could not be simplified, could not be unified, could not be controlled. The collective consciousness was about to learn what humanity truly meant, and the lesson would be taught by those the collective considered most broken. Sarah looked out at the stars again, seeing them not with wonder now, but with resolve. Somewhere out there, the collective was planning humanity's absorption. But here, on this ship, the resistance was being born, and it started with the ones who thought differently. The Endeavor set course for Earth at maximum speed. They had 4 months before they arrived. 4 months to understand the collective's technology. 4 months to find a way to break the telepathic bonds that held 80% of the crew. 4 months to prepare humanity for a war unlike any they had ever fought. A war for the right to be individuals. A war for the right to be different. A war for the right to be human. And the warriors of that war would be the anxious, the depressed, the distracted, the obsessive, the autistic, the ones who had always known that their minds worked differently, the ones who had always struggled to fit into neat categories. Now those differences would be humanity's salvation. James came to find Sarah in the observation deck late that night. Neither of them could sleep. Too much had changed too quickly. "Do you think we can win?" he asked. Sarah considered the question. A week ago, she would have asked what winning meant. Now she knew. Winning meant staying free, staying separate, staying human in all their messy, chaotic, beautiful diversity. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know we're going to try, because if we don't, humanity stops being humanity. We become just another voice in the collective's chorus. And I don't know about you, but I've spent my whole life feeling like I don't quite fit in. I'm not about to start now." James laughed, a real laugh despite everything. "Yeah, I guess being stubborn and resistant to authority is another thing that makes us immune." "Added to the list," Sarah said. They stood together in silence, watching the stars stream past as the ship raced toward home. Somewhere out there, the collective was waiting. 3,000 years of unified consciousness, 247 species absorbed into perfect harmony, and now humanity. Different, diverse, divided in beautiful, fractious ways. The galaxy was about to discover that humans were very good at being difficult. The medical bay had become Dr. Hassan's domain. He moved between the sedated crew members, monitoring their brain activity and searching for patterns. The affected individuals showed synchronized neural oscillations, their brainwaves moving in perfect harmony with each other. It was, from a purely scientific standpoint, remarkable. It was also terrifying. "I think I've found something," Hassan said when Sarah came to check on his progress. His eyes were red with exhaustion, but there was excitement there too. The collective's connection works through quantum entanglement of neural structures. They literally link brains together on a quantum level. But the connection has a frequency, a specific pattern it follows. "Can we disrupt it?" Sarah asked. "Maybe. But here's the interesting part. When I mapped out the frequency, I noticed something. It's regular, perfectly regular, almost mechanical in its precision. Human brain waves are never that regular. Even in deep sleep, there's variation, chaos, unpredictability. The neurodivergent brain just has more of it." "So we need to introduce chaos," Sarah said, understanding. "Exactly. The collective's control requires synchronization. If we can desynchronize the affected crew members, we might be able to break the connection. The question is how to do it without causing permanent damage." Sarah thought about her own brain, about the constant low-level anxiety that had been her companion since childhood. Her doctors had tried to help her achieve calm, achieve balance. She had learned coping strategies, meditation techniques, ways to quiet the worried voice in her head. But maybe, just maybe, that worried voice was exactly what had saved her. "What if we could temporarily induce anxiety," she suggested, "or some other strong emotional state that creates neural chaos?" Hassan frowned. "It would be incredibly risky. Too much stress could cause serious psychological harm. But it might work. If we could create enough neural disruption, the collective's frequency might not be able to maintain its hold." They spent the next week developing a protocol. It involved a combination of drugs, sensory stimulation, and targeted magnetic fields designed to disrupt the synchronized brainwaves. They tested it on one volunteer, Ensign David Torres, who had been among the first affected. The procedure took 3 hours. Sarah watched through the observation window as Torres's brain activity became increasingly chaotic. The synchronized waves broke apart, fragmented, scattered into 1,000 different patterns. For a terrible moment, she thought they had broken him entirely. Then Torres opened his eyes. really opened them, with consciousness and confusion and anger. "Commander," he said, his voice hoarse, "what, what happened?" I remember the speakers, and then it was like I was drowning in other people's thoughts. I couldn't tell where I ended and they began. "You were under the collective's control," Sarah said, relief flooding through her. "But we got you back. How do you feel?" Torres sat up slowly, pressing a hand to his head. "Like I've been hit by a truck. But I'm me again. I can feel it. I'm just me, not part of something else." He looked at Sarah with haunted eyes. "They're still there, Commander. The collective. I can feel them trying to reach me. But they can't get in anymore. What did you do?" "We introduced chaos," Hassan explained. "We disrupted your neural patterns enough to break the synchronization. And it seems to have a lasting effect. Your brain has learned to resist." They repeated the procedure on the rest of the affected crew over the following days. Not all of them survived the transition. 2 crew members suffered severe psychological breaks, their minds unable to handle the sudden shift from collective to individual consciousness. It was a sobering reminder that the war against the collective had casualties, but 38 crew members were successfully freed. They remembered everything about being part of the collective, and their testimonies painted a disturbing picture. "It was beautiful at first," Lieutenant Maria Santos said during her debriefing. "I could feel every mind in the collective, billions of consciousnesses all connected. There was no loneliness, no doubt. Every question had an answer. Every fear was soothed. But then I realized I couldn't disagree. When the collective thought something, I thought it too. When the collective wanted something, I wanted it. I wasn't contributing to the whole. I was being absorbed by it." "Did you maintain any sense of self?" James asked. "At first, yes, but it was fading. Every moment I was connected, more of me dissolved into the we. Given enough time, Maria Santos would have ceased to exist entirely. I would have just been another node in the network, thinking the collective's thoughts, wanting the collective's wants. They call it peace. I call it death." The testimonies were consistent. The collective didn't erase individuals through cruelty, but through overwhelming kindness. It offered an end to suffering, an end to loneliness, an end to the burden of individual choice. For most species, that offer was irresistible. For most humans, it would be irresistible too. But for those whose brains couldn't synchronize, whose neural chaos protected them, that offer was a threat. Sarah called a meeting of all crew members, both those who had been freed and those who had never been affected. "We're 3 months from Earth," she said. "When we arrive, we need to have answers. We need to be able to protect our world from what's coming, because the collective isn't going to stop. They've already sent more ships. They're coming to welcome humanity, whether we want to be welcomed or not." "How do we fight something that most people won't even want to fight?" Torres asked. "Once the collective reaches Earth, once people feel what it's like to be connected, most of them will choose to join." "Then we need to make sure people understand what they're choosing," Sarah said. "We need to make sure they know what they'll lose. Individual thought, personal privacy, the ability to change your mind or disagree or grow in unexpected directions. The collective offers peace, but it's the peace of stagnation. Humans don't do well with stagnation. We also need to spread the chaos," James added. "If we can teach neurotypical humans how to introduce deliberate neural disruption, we might be able to increase their resistance. Meditation techniques, brain training, even certain drugs might help. We can't make everyone neurodivergent, but we might be able to make everyone a little more chaotic." "And we need to find allies," Lieutenant Okonkwo said. "The collective has absorbed 247 species, but if humanity is immune, maybe there are others. Maybe there are other neurodivergent aliens out there, hidden in populations that appear completely assimilated. If we can find them, we might not be alone in this fight." It was a plan, or at least the beginning of one. The Endeavor would become more than an exploration vessel. It would become the flagship of human resistance, and its crew, the neurodivergent 20% who had never expected to be heroes, would lead the way. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be easy. The collective had resources beyond imagination. They had technology that seemed like magic. They had 3,000 years of experience in absorbing species. And most dangerously, they genuinely believed they were helping. In their minds, they were saving humanity from the suffering of separation. How do you fight someone who thinks they're rescuing you? The answer came from an unexpected source. Ensign Rachel Kim, the autistic engineer who rarely spoke in group settings, requested a private meeting with Sarah. "I've been thinking about the collective's technology," Rachel said, speaking quickly, her eyes fixed on a point just over Sarah's shoulder. "They use quantum entanglement for the telepathic link, but quantum states are fragile. They collapse when observed. What if that's the key? What if human consciousness is just naturally more observant, more questioning? Neurotypical humans might synchronize with the collective, but they still have that human trait of asking why, of doubting, of needing to understand. The collective's control works perfectly on species that accept things as they are. But humans, even neurotypical humans, we question everything. We're annoying that way." Sarah felt a spark of hope. So if we could encourage people to question, to observe, to analyze their own thoughts, it might weaken the collective's hold, Rachel finished. "I don't think it would make people immune like we are. Our brains are just wired differently. But it might make the control less absolute. It might let people retain more of themselves." How do we encourage questioning on a planetary scale? Rachel finally met Sarah's eyes, just for a moment. "We tell the truth. We show people what the collective really is, and we trust that humans will do what humans do best. Cause problems, ask difficult questions, refuse to accept simple answers. We're a stubborn species, Commander. Let's use that." The plan began to take shape. When the Endeavour reached Earth, they would broadcast everything. The testimonies of the freed crew members, the brain scans showing what happened to human consciousness under collective control, the warnings about what was coming. They would make humanity paranoid, questioning, resistant. They would weaponize human stubbornness. But they had another problem. The three speakers were still on board, still attempting to reach out with their minds, and they were learning. Sarah could feel it. Where once the mental touch had been gentle and easily deflected, now it was more insistent, more targeted. The collective was studying them, learning from them, trying to understand how human resistance worked. "We need to make a decision about the speakers," Sarah told her senior staff. "They're gathering intelligence every moment they're on this ship. But if we kill them, we become murderers. If we release them, they'll report everything they've learned to the collective." "There might be a third option," James said. "What if we could communicate with them? Really communicate, not just exchange words, but share understanding. If we could make them see why individual consciousness matters, why diversity matters, maybe we could change their minds, make them allies instead of enemies." "You're suggesting we reverse convert them?" Torres said skeptically. "Get the collective to join us instead of us joining them?" "Why not? They want to understand us. Let's let them. Let's show them what makes humanity worth preserving." It was a risky idea, but Sarah had been taking risks since the day the speakers first boarded her ship. She approved the plan. James worked with the speakers for weeks, slowly building a bridge between human consciousness and the collective's unified mind. It was exhausting work, like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen. But gradually, something shifted. The speakers began to ask questions, real questions, not just requests for data. "Why do you value disagreement?" one asked James during a session. "Disagreement causes conflict. Conflict causes suffering. Disagreement also causes growth," James explained. "When two humans disagree, we're forced to examine our own beliefs, to consider other perspectives. We might change our minds, or we might become more certain of our original position. But either way, we've grown. We've thought more deeply. The collective doesn't allow for that kind of growth because the collective is always certain. Certainty is peace, the speaker said. Certainty is stagnation, James countered. Peace is valuable, but so is progress. Humanity has made incredible advances precisely because we question everything, including ourselves. Our neurodivergent individuals often see things others miss because their brains work differently. If we were all the same, if we all thought the same way, we would never have those breakthrough moments. The speaker was quiet for a long time. Then it said something that changed everything. The collective is curious about you, not just about how you resist, but about why you resist. We have spent 3,000 years in perfect harmony. We have solved every problem that can be solved through collective thought. But we have not advanced in those 3,000 years. We have not grown. We have only expanded. Perhaps we have been stagnant. It was the first crack in the collective's certainty, and Sarah intended to exploit it. The Endeavour was 2 weeks from Earth when they received a transmission from the collective's fleet. 12 ships were approaching Earth from multiple vectors. They would arrive within days of the Endeavour. The invasion, if it could be called that, was imminent. But Sarah had a plan. It was dangerous and probably insane, but it was all they had. "We're going to let them come," she announced to her crew. "We're going to let the collective make contact with Earth, but we're going to do it on our terms. We're going to make sure that first contact happens with people who are prepared, who understand the danger, who can resist long enough to spread the warning." "You want to use Earth's neurodivergent population as the first line of defense," Hassan said, understanding immediately. "Exactly. We've identified several major cities with high concentrations of mental health facilities, autism centers, ADHD support groups. We'll coordinate with them first. They'll be our immune population, our resistance network. While the collective is trying to figure out why so many humans are resistant, we'll be fortifying Earth's defenses." "And the speakers?" Torres asked. Sarah looked at the 3 aliens who had been the source of so much trouble and, potentially, so much hope. "The speakers are going to help us," she said, "because they're starting to understand what's at stake. Not just humanity's freedom, but the collective's future. A civilization that stops growing is a civilization that's dying. The collective has been dying for 3,000 years. It just didn't know it." The first speaker approached Sarah. Its colors had changed since their capture, becoming more varied, more dynamic. It was, James theorized, a sign that exposure to human chaos was affecting even the speakers themselves. "We will help," the speaker said, "but we cannot promise that the collective will listen. We are 3 voices among billions. Our experience with you is anomalous, interesting, but the collective moves slowly. It changes slowly." "Then we'll have to be loud," Sarah said. "Loud enough that the collective can't ignore us. Loud enough that every species in the galaxy hears about the humans who said no to forced unity. Loud enough that maybe, just maybe, other voices will join ours." The Endeavour dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. Home had never looked so beautiful, or so vulnerable. Sarah could see the collective ships on the scanners, massive vessels that dwarfed her own. They were already in orbit around Earth, already beginning their careful, gentle process of first contact. But this time, first contact would be different. Sarah opened a broadcast channel to every frequency humanity used: radio, television, internet, satellite communication. She made sure every human on Earth could hear her message. "People of Earth," she began, "my name is Commander Sarah Chen of the exploration vessel Endeavour. We have made first contact with an alien civilization called the Collective Consciousness. They come in peace. They come with promises of unity and understanding. And if you accept their offer, you will lose everything that makes you human." She shared everything: the brain scans, the testimonies, the science behind the collective's control. But most importantly, she shared the hope. "Some of us are immune," she said. "Those of us whose brains work differently, whose minds don't follow the typical patterns. The anxious, the depressed, the autistic, the ADHD, all of us who have been told we need to be fixed, we're the ones who can resist. But even if you're not immune, you can fight. Question everything. Observe your own thoughts. Embrace your doubts and your differences. Be stubborn. Be difficult. Be magnificently, chaotically human. Around the world, people listened. Some believed her, many didn't. But in mental health clinics, in support groups, in hospitals, in therapy sessions, the neurodivergent population of Earth began to mobilize. They had spent their lives being told they were broken. Now they were being told they were humanity's last hope, and they rose to the challenge. The collective's representatives landed in major cities around the world. They came with their gentle, mental touch and their promises of peace. And in most places they found what they always found: people eager for connection, grateful for the end of loneliness, ready to embrace unity. But in every city, there were those who resisted, those who felt the touch and rejected it, those whose chaotic minds could not be synchronized. And they became the anchors, the fixed points around which resistance could organize. Sarah Chen watched from the endeavor as Earth struggled with the most important choice in human history: join the collective and find peace, or remain separate and stay human. It wasn't an easy choice. The collective's offer was genuinely appealing. Who wouldn't want to end loneliness, to always understand and be understood, to have access to the wisdom of billions of minds? For people suffering from depression, anxiety, isolation, the promise of constant connection was almost irresistible. But Sarah had seen what that connection cost. She had watched her crew members lose themselves in the collective's embrace, and she knew that some gifts were too expensive to accept. The resistance grew slowly at first, then faster as the neurodivergent population shared their immunity, their strength. They formed networks, taught techniques, spread the message that being different was not just okay, but essential. They turned their struggles into weapons and their differences into shields. The collective had never encountered anything like it: a species that actively celebrated its internal divisions, a species that considered mental chaos to be a feature rather than a bug, a species that, when offered peace and unity, chose conflict and diversity instead. It didn't make sense to the collective, but then again, very little about humans made sense. The war for Earth lasted 3 months. It wasn't a war of weapons, but of minds. The collective kept trying to bring humanity into the fold, kept offering connection and understanding, and humanity kept saying, no. Not all of humanity, but enough. 20% immune and another 30% trained in resistance techniques was enough to create a critical mass of independence. The collective had never failed before. They didn't know how to deal with failure. In the end, it was the speakers who made the difference. The 3 who had lived on the endeavor, who had been exposed to human chaos for months, who had begun to question their own certainty. They spoke to the collective, shared their experiences, and introduced a radical idea. What if the collective was wrong? What if forced unity wasn't the ultimate goal of intelligent life? What if diversity, disagreement, and individual consciousness had value that the collective had forgotten? It was a small seed of doubt, but in a civilization built on absolute certainty, even small doubts could grow into something transformative. The collective withdrew from Earth, not in defeat, but in confusion. They needed time to consider what humanity represented. They needed to understand how a species so fractured, so divided, so chaotic could be so strong. Sarah stood on Earth's surface for the first time in 5 years, breathing air that tasted like home. Around her, the world was celebrating. Humanity had faced the ultimate test and remained human. Not because they were stronger than other species, but because they were more complicated, more difficult, more annoying, as Rachel Kim would say. James found her standing in a park in New York City, watching children play. Some of those children would grow up neurotypical. Some would grow up neurodivergent. All of them would grow up in a world that had learned to value both. What do you think happens now? James asked. I don't know, Sarah admitted. The collective is still out there. They're still powerful, but they're questioning themselves for the first time in 3,000 years. That's something. Do you think they'll try again? Maybe, but if they do, we'll be ready. And maybe by then we'll have found others, other neurodivergent individuals in other species, other pockets of resistance in the collective's perfect unity. Maybe humanity won't be alone for long. Humanity's never been alone, James pointed out. We've always had each other in all our messy, complicated glory. That's what the collective couldn't understand. We don't need them to give us connection. We already have it on our own terms. Sarah nodded. It was true. Humanity was connected through choice, not compulsion, through love and friendship and shared struggle, not through forced, telepathic bonds. It was messier, harder, more painful, but it was real, and it was theirs. The neurodivergent population of Earth had saved the world. Those who had spent their lives feeling different, feeling broken, feeling like they didn't fit in, had turned out to be exactly what humanity needed. Their anxiety, their depression, their autism, their ADHD, all the things the world had tried to fix, had been the key to freedom. Sarah thought about her own journey, about the anxiety that had colored her entire life. She had spent years trying to manage it, control it, minimize it. She had seen it as a flaw, a weakness, something to be ashamed of. Now she understood that it was also her strength, her constant questioning, her vigilance, her inability to simply accept things as they were. That was what had saved her. That was what had helped her save humanity. We should probably tell them, James said, nodding toward the children in the park. Tell them what? That being different is okay, more than okay, essential. That the things that make them strange or difficult or hard to understand might one day save the world. I think they know, Sarah said, watching a young girl with obvious autism mannerisms play alone, creating elaborate structures with sticks and leaves, completely absorbed in her own world. Or they will, because we're going to make sure of it. The collective ships left orbit, heading back to whatever central hub coordinated their vast consciousness. But Sarah knew this wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning. The galaxy had just learned that humanity existed, and that humanity was unlike anything that had come before. Some would see that as a threat. Others might see it as hope. Either way, humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and the universe would never be quite the same. In the weeks that followed, Earth began to rebuild its self-image. The neurodivergent community, so long marginalized and misunderstood, found themselves celebrated as heroes. Support groups became strategy centers. Therapy sessions became training grounds. The people who had spent their lives learning to cope with a world that didn't understand them were now teaching the world how to cope with a galaxy that wanted to eliminate difference. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Prejudice doesn't disappear overnight, but something fundamental had shifted. When a person could point to their anxiety, their ADHD, their autism, and say, "This is what saved humanity," it became a lot harder to dismiss those conditions as simply problems to be solved. Dr. Hassan established the Institute for Neural Diversity, dedicated to understanding how different types of consciousness could coexist and strengthen each other. Rachel Kim led the engineering division, developing technology that could protect human minds from unwanted telepathic intrusion. Lieutenant Okonkwo trained the first wave of chaos agents, people who specialized in introducing neural disruption to break collective control. And James Park became Earth's ambassador to the neurodivergent populations of other species. Because once humanity started looking, they found them. Small communities within collective species who showed signs of individual thought, of resistance, of that crucial neural chaos that the collective couldn't fully integrate. They were rare, maybe 1 in 1,000 rather than 1 in 5 like humans. But they existed, and now they knew they weren't alone. Sarah received a message from the speakers 6 months after they left Earth. It was brief and formal, But the meaning was clear. The collective was changing, slowly, resistant to transformation, as any 3,000-year-old civilization would be, but changing nonetheless. Humanity had introduced doubt into a system built on certainty, and doubt was spreading like ripples through water. Some in the collective saw humanity as a disease, a corruption to be eliminated, but others, including the three speakers who had lived among humans, saw humanity as medicine, a treatment for the stagnation that had infected the galaxy for millennia. The message ended with a question: will humanity help us learn to be different again? Sarah laughed when she read it. Trust humans to be so difficult that even forced telepathic unity couldn't handle them. Trust humans to be so chaotic that an ancient galactic civilization started questioning its fundamental nature after just a few months of exposure. She drafted her reply carefully. Yes, we'll help, but only if you're willing to embrace real diversity. Not just tolerating difference, but celebrating it. Not just allowing individual consciousness, but defending it. If you can do that, if you can learn to value the very thing you've been erasing for 3,000 years, then we'll teach you everything we know about being beautifully, frustratingly, magnificently different. She sent the message knowing it might change the course of galactic history, or it might change nothing. Either way, humanity had done something no other species had managed. They had said no to the collective and survived. They had proven that forced unity wasn't the only path for intelligent life. And they had done it because their brains didn't work right, because they were anxious and depressed and distracted and obsessive, because they saw the world through fractured lenses and heard thoughts in discordant rhythms, because they were human in all the ways that made them strange. Sarah returned to the Endeavour, which was being refitted as humanity's flagship for continuing exploration. The crew was a mix now, both those who had been immune from the start and those who had been freed from collective control. They all bore scars from the experience, but they also carried knowledge. They knew what was out there, they knew what threatened humanity, and they knew what protected it. "Course heading, Commander?" asked the helmsman, a young, neurotypical man who had trained under Rachel Kim in resistance techniques. Sarah looked at the star map, at the vast, unexplored regions of space, at the thousands of worlds where the collective held sway. Out there were neurodivergent aliens living under collective control, their differences suppressed or eliminated. Out there were species that might also have pockets of resistance if given the chance. Out there was a galaxy that desperately needed to learn that difference wasn't a problem to be solved, but a resource to be celebrated. "Set course for the Andromeda sector," Sarah said. "Time to find more troublemakers." The Endeavour leaped into faster-than-light travel, carrying humanity's message to the stars. That message was simple but revolutionary. You don't have to be the same. You don't have to fit in. You don't have to think like everyone else. Your differences, your struggles, your unique perspective on reality, these aren't flaws, they're features. They're exactly what makes you valuable, what makes you essential, what makes you free. It was a message humanity had learned the hard way, through the people who had always known they were different. The anxious ones who questioned everything, the depressed ones who saw through easy answers, the autistic ones who processed the world on their own terms, the ADHD ones who couldn't be confined to a single track of thought. These were humanity's heroes, though they had never expected to be. They had spent their lives just trying to survive in a world that didn't quite fit them. Now they were showing the galaxy how to survive a universe that wanted everyone to be the same. And as the Endeavour traveled deeper into space, as its crew encountered new species and new challenges, one truth remained constant. Humanity would never surrender its diversity. Not to the collective, not to any force in the universe, because humanity had learned what the collective never understood. The chaos wasn't a bug in human consciousness. It was the whole point. Years later, Sarah Chen would stand before the Galactic Assembly, a new organization formed by species seeking alternatives to the collective. She would be asked to explain how humanity had resisted, how they had maintained their independence when every other species had failed. Her answer would be simple. "We're difficult," she would say. "We don't agree on anything. We argue with each other constantly. We have hundreds of different ways of thinking, processing, experiencing reality. We're anxious and depressed and distracted and obsessive. We're a mess. And that mess is what saved us. Because you can't control chaos. You can't synchronize what refuses to sync. You can't unify what's fundamentally diverse. The collective tried to absorb humanity, but were too scattered, too different, too stubbornly individual to be absorbed. They wanted to cure our differences. Those differences were our vaccine." The Assembly would vote that day to formally recognize neurodiversity as a fundamental right for all species, to protect those whose minds worked differently, to celebrate the chaos that prevented stagnation. It wouldn't end the collective's influence overnight. 3,000 years of unified consciousness couldn't be undone in a generation. But it was a start. And it began with humanity saying no, with the anxious, the depressed, the autistic, the ADHD, all those who had been told they needed to be fixed, proving that they were exactly what the galaxy needed them to be: different, resistant, beautifully, chaotically, essentially human. The war for individual consciousness wasn't over. It might never be over. The collective still existed, still believed in their vision of perfect unity. But now there was an alternative. Now there was proof that intelligent life could thrive in diversity, that civilization could advance through disagreement, that chaos and order could coexist. Humanity had given the galaxy a gift. Not the gift of unity that the collective offered, but the gift of choice. The freedom to be different, the right to think independently, the chance to experience consciousness on one's own terms. And for that gift, the galaxy would remember Earth, not as a planet of broken minds that needed fixing, but as a world of diverse minds that changed everything. The neurodivergent became the neurodefenders. The outliers became the vanguard. The ones who never fit in finally found their place as the ones who would ensure that no one ever had to fit in again. Sarah Chen lived to see humanity take its place among the stars, not as the newest member of the collective, but as the founder of something new, something chaotic and messy and argumentative and absolutely vital. A galactic community built not on forced unity, but on chosen cooperation, not on erasing differences, but on defending them. She never forgot the moment when the speakers first touched her mind and found nothing to hold on to. She never forgot the fear and the confusion and the slow realization that her anxiety, her lifelong companion in struggle, was also her shield. She never forgot that the things the world had tried to fix about her were the same things that saved the world. And when she finally retired, returning to Earth to write her memoirs, she dedicated them to everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong, to everyone whose brain didn't work the way it was supposed to everyone who had been told they needed to change, to fit in, to be normal. "You were always normal," she wrote in the dedication. "Your normal just happened to be exactly what humanity needed to stay free. Thank you for being difficult. Thank you for being different. Thank you for being the chaos that saved us all." The galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. Humanity couldn't be controlled because humanity couldn't even control itself. And in that beautiful, frustrating, magnificent chaos lay the secret to true freedom. The collective had wanted to bring peace through unity. Humanity brought peace through diversity. The collective had wanted to end suffering through connection. Humanity chose to embrace suffering as part of the price of independence. The collective had wanted to create perfection through synchronization. Humanity proved that perfection was a myth and chaos was a virtue. In the end, humanity's resistance to mind control wasn't a genetic accident or a special power. It was simply the natural result of being a species that had never agreed on anything, had never thought the same way, had never fit into neat categories. A species that had carried its neurodivergent members through millions of years of evolution because, on some deep level, humanity understood that different minds were valuable minds. The anxious ones who saw danger before others, the depressed ones who thought deeply about meaning, the autistic ones who noticed patterns everyone else missed, the ADHD ones who made connections across disparate fields. Every variation of human consciousness had contributed something essential to humanity's survival. And when the collective came with their promise of perfect unity, it was those same variations that ensured humanity's independence. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders. But the greatest wonder, Sarah Chen believed, was the human brain in all its chaotic diversity. It wasn't the smartest brain or the most powerful, but it was the most stubborn, the most varied, the most magnificently uncontrollable brain in the known universe. And that made all the difference. As Sarah Chen closed her memoirs and looked out at the stars, she smiled. Somewhere out there, the collective was slowly learning to value difference. Somewhere out there, neurodivergent aliens were finding their voices. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was becoming a little more chaotic, a little more diverse, a little more free. All because humanity had refused to be simple, had refused to be unified, had refused to be anything other than exactly what they were. A beautiful, frustrating, chaotic mess of individual minds that absolutely could not be controlled, and never would be.